Boxstar Forum, it's your boy Terry L, and I'm back at y'all with another one. Got some boxing news for y'all. This one is about Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder. Deontay has recently intimated that he may retire from the sport of boxing following his trilogy loss, where he was stopped in the 11th round by Tyson Fury. Deontay Wilder has told LOL Network that he may consider retiring from the sport, having received everything that he's done in the sport, accomplishing all his goals. Now, Deontay Wilder, 42 wins, only 2 defeats, 1 draw, and 41 KOs. Obviously, his 2 defeats came to the hands of Tyson Fury. The 1 draw also comes to the hands of Tyson Fury. And the 41 KOs in his 41 fights, 42 fights prior to fighting Tyson Fury, where the only decision that he won was the only fight that went to the distance was Sylvester Stallone when he won the WBC belt back in 2015. Deontay Wilder is an interesting character. If you know about Deontay Wilder's past, he has a daughter that is suffering from spina bifida, which is a debilitating disease, and not disease, but a debilitating condition of the neuromuscular system. And he has always made clear that he intended to box to support his daughter and, of course, his family. Deontay Wilder is someone that I have a lot of admiration and respect for because he always came through the back door. He always did things beyond the expectations of others. In the sport of boxing, a lot of people didn't really give him much of a chance. Deontay Wilder fought in the U.S. Olympic team. And when he turned pro in 2008, he fought at many small halls and small shows and pretty much came up the hard way, as a lot of fighters have in the sport of boxing. But he won a bronze medal in the Olympics, much to a lot of people's surprise. As I mentioned before, a lot of people didn't give Deontay Wilder a chance in the sport of boxing because they thought he was just too gangly, too wild, didn't have enough boxing experience, wasn't technically the best and the most sound. So, yada, yada, yada. Having said all of that, he succumbed to all of those criticisms, defied all his critics, and eventually not only winning an Olympic medal, but he went on to become the WBC World Heavyweight title. So let me tell you what Deontay Wilder has said to a network called LOL Network, and I quote, I have accomplished my goals in this sport. I told my daughter when she was 1 that I'd be champion and able to support her beyond belief. I've done that. Should I give it a go one more time, or should I just retire and focus on other things? End of quote. This is Deontay Wilder recently making a statement to LOL Network. Now, this may not come as some surprise. It's not a surprise to most athletes or most boxers when they come off a loss or a defeat. A lot of athletes don't sit off in the limelight after a victory, or if you're an NFL player, after your Super Bowl victory. Some guys don't retire. They normally feel that they can give it another shot, and then their body can't cope in the off season or in the regular season, and then they call it a day. Or if you're a fighter, normally most fighters retire after a loss. Most recently, Sean Porter retired after he lost to Terrence Crawford. And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, Mike Tyson retired, the great Mike Tyson retired after a loss. Bernard Hopkins after a loss to Tom Smith Jr., Roy Jones Jr. retired after a loss, and so on and so forth. So a lot of boxers do retire after a bad loss or an injury loss or what have you. So to hear Deontay Wilder talk about retirement isn't a surprise. I actually thought he would speak about retirement after that loss to Tyson Fury. It was a hard loss because it was a fight that he really wanted to win. It was a fighter that he really wanted to beat. He just didn't have enough in him to beat Tyson Fury, a bit too much for him. A big man who can box, can move quite well on his feet, has a great boxing IQ. And of course, we've seen in the last two fights with Deontay Wilder, he possessed a bit of power as well, when most people thought Tyson Fury didn't have power. So the reality is, should Deontay Wilder retire, as most boxing observers feel that he has four good fights out there if he wished to continue to fight. Now he is 36 years old, I think going on 37, and that's not young in the sport of boxing. It's not young in any age in athletic or in sporting terms. It's considered old by other observers, but he's a young 36-year-old. He's not had a lot of punishment to his body. He's in magnificent shape. But let's talk about the fights that he could have if he was to continue and not retire. Obviously, he has Andy Ruiz Jr., who he could fight. Ruiz Jr., who we all know, sensationally beat Anthony Joshua in Anthony Joshua's first loss, but Anthony Joshua avenged that loss in the rematch in Saudi Arabia, where mysteriously, or beyond anyone's belief, Andy Ruiz Jr. came in much heavier for the second fight than he did for the first fight. A mistake he's still kicking himself for, and now he's in tip-top shape in the Eddie Reynoso camp. When you think of Andy Ruiz Jr., excuse me, Andy Ruiz Jr. fought a 40-year-old Ariola and didn't look that great. He was hoping that fight would propel him for a trilogy fight with Anthony Joshua. But then again, Anthony Joshua did lose to Alexander Usyk, and there's no chance that Andy Ruiz Jr. would fight Usyk at this stage, especially with the rematch looming. Furthermore, if Usyk was to beat AJ in the rematch, which some observers believe he can do quite comfortably, then he wouldn't fancy fighting Andy Ruiz Jr. just yet, because he would probably look to unify the belts by having a big money fight against Tyson Fury. That's if Tyson Fury gets through his mandatory fight with Dillian White, which should be coming up pretty shortly in terms of when it will be in sometime in 2022. So therefore, that leaves Andy Ruiz Jr. searching for a big name fighter to put him back on the world scale in terms of fighting for a world title. Dillian White would be the obvious choice. That's whether or not Dillian White would want to fight Andy Ruiz Jr. As I mentioned, Deontay Wilder. If Deontay Wilder would seek a fight with Andy Ruiz Jr., purely because Andy Ruiz needs Deontay Wilder more than Deontay Wilder needs Andy Ruiz Jr. The next person everyone would love to see Deontay Wilder fight would be Anthony Joshua. Whether Anthony Joshua wins against Alexander Usyk in a rematch, whether or not Anthony Joshua was to ever fight Tyson Fury, win, lose, or draw in that fight, people would still want to see Deontay Wilder fight Anthony Joshua. It's just a fight that, because there's a bit of bite to it and a bit of spite to it, there's a bit of history between the two fighters, people would still want to see these two guys climb in the ring and go at it. And it would be a big money fight. A lot more money for Deontay Wilder and AJ than if Deontay Wilder was to fight Andy Ruiz Jr. You got to think, when a man talks retirement, especially in the case of Deontay Wilder, the one thing that almost retired fighter would want to do is go out for a big money fight. There would be no point in Deontay Wilder going in the ring to fight Andy Ruiz Jr. for $5 million. If he could make $5 million, well, he made quadruple that when he fought Tyson Fury. And once you get that type of financial reward, you don't really want to take a step backwards. You only want to take a step forward and take another big money fight. So that, I don't think, would happen. But it depends on Deontay Wilder's motivation, whether he believes or is promised that if he beats Andy Ruiz Jr., he'll get another crack at the title, whether, depending on who holds the marbles, after everyone finished beating each other up between Alexander Usyk, AJ, Tyson Fury, and you got to throw Dillian White in the mix, because now he's the WBC mandatory challenger. So that would be the obvious choice, fighting AJ, and he could be lured into fighting AJ for a big money fight. There's Dillian White. There's a lot of, once again, a lot of spite and bite between those two fighters. They would love to get in the ring with each other. But once again, it's a grudge match, but it's not a grudge match that will produce a lot of money on the table for Deontay Wilder. Once again, when a fighter wants to walk away from the sport and he's already financially set, it's estimated that Deontay Wilder has a net worth of about $30 million. That's not chump change. That's a lot of money. And he could comfortably provide for himself and his family for the rest of their entire lives. There's no way that he'll be broke with that kind of money. And then he'll have other things, other investments that he's probably working on. There's probably some TV deals, maybe some commentary deals in the pipe work. Who knows? But he isn't someone that will walk away from the sport and not have anything to walk to or come to or be enticed to be around. He'll be around the sport of boxing, making a few dollars here and there to keep his millions in check so he doesn't dip into the pot too much. So that you can rest assured. And then there's the other obvious fighter that he could fight is Alexander Usyk. Depending on what Usyk does, whether in the rematch with AJ, if he comes out of that victorious and then fights Tyson Fury or whoever wins between Tyson Fury and Dillian White, let's say it is Dillian White and Alexander Usyk beats AJ, then let's just say Usyk beats Dillian White. Would Deontay Wilder be tempted to fight Alexander Usyk? Would Usyk be willing to put everything on the line to fight a very dangerous opponent in Deontay Wilder? And then whether or not Deontay Wilder can get the fights that will keep him fresh, ticking along until he gets a shot at the title. What would make more sense for me for Dillian White? I'm sorry, I keep saying Dillian White. That's because I'm really focused on this next podcast already with Dillian White and Tyson Fury. My apologies. But let's just say Usyk comes through several fights victorious, i.e. with AJ and then the winner of the Dillian White Tyson Fury fights. And let's say by the end of 2022, Alexander Usyk is still reigning supreme. He's still the champion. That means Alexander Usyk would probably fancy his chances against Andy Ruiz Jr. or even Deontay "The Bronze Bomber" Wilder. Or he could even fancy himself against another top contender, another top heavyweight. It all depends on where the mandatory challenges lie and whether or not, if they lay in favor of taking a big money fight with some of the aforementioned or going with a young up and coming heavyweight, if that's something that he would want to do. But then that could be a fight that Deontay Wilder would consider. But then you have to imagine if Deontay Wilder hasn't fought in that time, then he wouldn't be a fresh 36/37-year-old. The best sense would be that if Deontay Wilder wanted to fight, wanted to continue to fight to give himself another shot at the world heavyweight title, then he should probably take a tune-up fight to keep him fresh so that him and Malik Scott can continue to work on the things they tried to perfect in the previous fights with Tyson Fury. But that's all up for discussion. That's all depending on whether or not Deontay Wilder still has that hunger. He's a soldier. He's a knockout specialist. He's an athlete. He's in tip-top shape. And some say that he doesn't have quit in him. And the big thing about fighters is a lot of fighters don't know when to quit. However, maybe he's had enough. Maybe that loss, that final loss to Tyson Fury was enough for him to realize, I've done all I can in the sport of boxing. There's nothing else to prove. The chances of him fighting AJ probably would be another year or two away. At that stage, he'd be close to 38 years old. Will he want to put his body through that pain and turmoil and suffering and to go one more again? I'm not sure at 38 years old, Deontay Wilder would fancy that fight unless they offer him silly money, like 50 mil to fight AJ. But that's my take on it. Deontay, the Bronze Bomber Wilder, has thrown out there that he may retire from the sport of boxing. Leave your comment on the box below. Hit the bell icon. Subscribe to the channel. Tell me what you think. Do you think Deontay Wilder should walk away from the sport of boxing? How will he be remembered? Will he be remembered as one of the greatest heavyweights the world's ever seen? Will he be just remembered as the greatest knockout specialist the world's ever seen? Or was he a hype job, and maybe the fighters that he fought and knocked out, we shouldn't get too excited about? That's my take on it for now. And that's all I got for y'all for now. You tell me what you think. Leave a like and subscribe button. Continue to support the channel. I'm out for now. Until the next time, holla back. Peace.